Hey everybody, welcome back to 608 Fab. I am back in the shop and working on the Aces EFI Fusion install. So I've got the cage, the fuel cell, the fuel lines, all that stuff is done at the ass end of the Jeep. I've got fuel lines routed up to the throttle body, mounted to the intake, and the regulator set up and return line set up. I'm missing a vent for the fuel tank yet. I've got to get that all plumbed in with the rollover valve and all that good jazz. But we are back to legitimate Aces Fusion EFI install stuff. So chassis work done. We're not covering any more of that. So I got instructions with mine. I know in a previous video I said online I was seeing guys weren't getting instructions, having to download things. But yes, I got a lot of pages of instructions, very simple instructions, so you do have to think about it a little bit. But I am on to installing sensors. All right, so I kind of took the wiring yesterday while I was up here, draped the wiring over the engine a little bit better, kind of started routing some things around. Where's the O2 sensor gonna go? You know, thermostat or temperature sensor, coil wiring, all that good jazz, right? So, I mean, it's so simple, there's not much there. But first things first, you know, I've been thinking about this the whole time. Where am I gonna put an O2 sensor in this thing? So I had to make custom headers. I've got duals running down each side of the chassis going into a 2-to-1 out muffler thing. And there's not a whole lot of room for stuff. So, and I'm also thinking, you know, tree branches, mud, debris, rocks, things getting thrown up into parts of this as I'm going along. So trying to get a decent spot to mount an O2 sensor is a little hard, but I found a spot. I'll show you that here on the header. Well, after the collector, and in this instructions it says you need to mount, you know, it gives you diagrams on how to, you know, clock the sensor in the pipe. It's got to be above, you know, they're looking for like a 10 o'clock to 2 o'clock and anywhere in between. That way any moisture that sits in the tip of that O2 sensor would drain out. It wouldn't puddle in moisture in the bottom of that exhaust pipe. So I picked a spot, best I could come up with, 6 to 10 inches after the collector. This thing's wonky. I picked a spot, right? I also had to pick a spot that I could weld the bung in. So the bung they ship you with this kit that I got, it is 90 degrees on both sides, right? So this is going into a piece of round pipe. Well, you stack it on top of the pipe. So I'm going into 2.5-inch exhaust tube. When you stack it on there, let's see if I can get the angle right there, it would rock back and forth, right? So I'm thinking, all right, how am I going to do this? I've done O2 sensors in motorcycle exhausts before. Most of those were some wonky, like 45-degree sensors to bury them on the backside of pipes so you couldn't see them. You know, you don't want a big ugly O2 sensor hanging off the side of your shiny Harley. So they all were coped on the backside, things like that. So I ended up coping this one, right? So now it's going to lay on the pipe nice and coped. You can see that. It matches. Drill my hole in the pipe, stack this on top of it, and I've got a nice no gap type kind of surface to do a fillet weld around it, get it all sealed up. Well, how'd you do that? How did you cope that thing right there? You could do it with a grinder, but I'm going into 2.5-inch exhaust tube. This little guy, this end roller is pretty damn close to 2.5 inch. So I clamped it in a pair of vice grips and ground it on this to make that coat. So let's go show you how I put it in. All right, so I run wrapped exhaust on this thing. I threw some zip ties on the wrap, unwrap this hose clamp. That clamp right there hangs out here, clamps it. So they say 6 to 10 inches after the collector. Well, this collector starts way up there, and I wasn't gonna put it into this area, although that would probably work, but I just didn't like it. I didn't like it up there. Now in hindsight, maybe it is better. Drilled my 7/8 hole there. This guy, see how it's coped like so, is gonna stack right on top of that. Find my sweet spot, and it's gonna get welded on. That theoretically should keep this thing pointed at a downward angle, keeps the water out of it, and hopefully it's tucked up in there far enough that I don't have to worry about things hitting it. If I do get concerned about it, I could bring a piece of tubing up just to block it, but we'll see how it looks once it's all welded in. All right, kids, got the O2 sensor installed. Trying a little light on the backside here. So got that welded in and made kind of a thin pass just to get it all tacked into place, and then did a little bit hotter pass. Got it a little boogery, but it's sealed up, shouldn't leak at all. O2 sensors in, first stages of the routing, and that's the first sensor installed. One of the other things real quick I'm going to cover is the fuel filter. So while I was working on this, I was working with one of the guys at the shop. He's a 3D printing fool, and he is going to draw up a 3D printed bracket to clamp this high pressure fuel line, high pressure fuel filter in place. So we're going to work on that a little bit tomorrow on lunch. He'll get that printed probably over the next couple days, and we'll have a pretty cool setup for that. So as always, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe this video. We're finally getting into some Aces EFI stuff. When you go to mount that bung, I highly suggest you cope that to match the pipe. It'll certainly make your life easier when you weld it in. And then let that puppy cool down and throw your O2 sensor in it. So don't forget to use some anti-spatter spray on there in case you get a weld booger inside the threads. That'll save your, I don't know, save from tapping it out or throwing it away and starting all over. So be good, do something cool in your garage. Till next time.